appreciate your time tonight. You started a little bit early. I'm the project manager on the consultant team of the Utah Department of Transportation, the Payson Main Street Environmental Impact Statement Project. That's underway. And I can speak up.
It's not plugged in for the reason. I think.
I'll plug it in now and then.
Okay, all right.
Let's see.
Karaoke days. Yeah, huge experience. So I was here in July to give you an update, and at that point, I'm just going to give you a little briefing just to familiarize yourself again with where we are in the project and kind of where we were at that point. So in July, we had gone through, and fundamentally, as far as the process of the EIS, this environmental impact statement, which is a federalized project, because we are looking to get federal money, and we are looking at doing something to the federal interstate system. And so that triggers a series of environmental laws under that federal umbrella. And so we worked through what is the problem that we're trying to solve, that was the purpose and need, and we talked at length about that, both in the spring and also in July, and then worked through, and we're right at the point where we're going through our alternative analysis. And back in July, I gave you a pamphlet that was this map book that was 11 by 17 that included all the conceptual alternatives that we had developed. There have been several changes to that map book in comparison to the one that I've given you today, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail as I go through the presentation. A couple things that have happened since July. And so what I did present to you, and I'm just going to go through this real quickly. Again, these are the steps ultimately for the EIS. Where we are today is that we are about to initiate a public open house, which will be held on December 3rd, and that will be held at the city offices here from 4 to 7. And that public meeting is really the hinge point to then screen the alternatives that you see before you in this 11 by 17. And so we worked through scoping. We held a meeting back in March. We went through purpose and need, developed a bunch of alternatives, and established, if you recall back in July, there was a series of screening processes. We had both level 1 and level 2 screening, which each one of those screening processes included a set criteria that then we would evaluate each alternative, compare them based on that criteria. And so we are at the point where we've populated that matrix, and I'll get into that. That's part of the map book you have with you as hard copy, as well as what I'll present. And then we're going to go to the public. We have had series of agency working group meetings, the agencies being EPA, Army Corps of Engineers, Fish and Wildlife. Ultimately, it may be necessary to get a 404 permit under the jurisdiction of the Army Corps. And so we work with those federal agency partners on a project like this.
What's the 404 for? What is?
For any impact to wetlands.
Oh, wetland, okay.
Or, yeah. Anything that falls in the jurisdiction of the Army Corps. And then we've also been holding several stakeholder working group meetings. And those working groups are a collective mix of residences, businesses, both along and adjacent Main Street, and adjacent to the existing Main Street interchange. And so we've populated this information. They have seen the information that you are being presented to tonight, and we'll show this exact same information to the public on December 3rd. It's after that point that collectively as a team, we will take the input that we've received during this process from the working group, from the stakeholders that we've met with, any comments that we receive from you, whether it's tonight verbally or in writing afterwards or during the open house, and then also from the public. And as a team, both as UDOT, Federal Highway, and the consultant team, the technical team, we will sit down together, and then we will narrow these alternatives down based on all of this input, all the facts and the analysis that you'll see tonight. to come up with several alternatives that then will go into the draft environmental impact statement. The draft environmental impact statement will analyze in much more detail several of these alternatives. We'll get into, there's about 26 resources that will go into a full analysis, whether it's cultural, wetlands, economic impacts, social impacts, a full gamut there that really falls under that federal compliance umbrella. And then that will take us through this summer. At that point, once we have an approved draft EIS, which will be a large document that will explore a narrowed number down of alternatives, at that point, we will hold another public meeting, and it will be a public hearing, which is actually more formal, at least from the law's perspective. And we will narrow the alternatives down to a preferred. It is at that time of the draft EIS, so this summer, we will come back to the council, and we'll come back prior to, and we will ask for a resolution of the council to ask for your resolution on what you think the preferred alternative should be once you are presented this
So when it gets
information.
narrowed all the way down like that, when it gets down to the last few, it will be you, I mean, with all this added information, you will be
Yes.
the ones that'll make the decision on the preferred.
Well, we will put together the documentation. We will then go out to the public, similar to the process where we're at right now. We will go out to the public, we'll get input from the public, we'll consider stakeholder input. We'll also be asking you for, as the city, a resolution on what you think the preferred is. All that information is then considered by, ultimately, it's Federal Highway's decision to say that a preferred alternative, this is our record of decision, which is the final approval of this EIS.
All right, thank you.
Any questions about the process and the track we're on? So I want to just play a short video for you, and this was done, and it just kind of highlights some of the work that's been done with the stakeholder working group, and just kind of gives a snapshot as we have progressed through this process to this point, some of the issues that have come about and what that means. Yeah, thanks, Dave.
We've met together with other business members and leaders in the community and discussed problems that we see with Main Street and also how those things can be prevented with the expansion in the future.
The people that live within that community and shop that community, they just love it. They just love that community because it has a small town feel to it.
It's kind of the gateway to the 3 other communities, so pretty much to get up to Salem or Woodland Hills or Elk Ridge, you have to come through Payson.
Well, Payson is right now, kind of functionally a bedroom community. It used to be the best kept secret around until now it's like a freeway here in front of our house.
Because of their location, they'll experience some fairly decent residential growth.
I don't think we have any choice but to enlarge some roads, which is going to take out some houses and some other things.
Operation Boom.
There are a lot of key businesses that continue to reside in the historic district, and so it becomes kind of the heart of the community and something that we certainly want to preserve and enhance.
The historic district means a lot to them. That's where everything started.
Historic Main Street is probably nostalgia, but it's also a concern because it doesn't hold business very long. Because people can get out on the freeway and go elsewhere, downtown is kind of ignored.
I think the historic district is part of the charm of the city. It's an essential part of keeping the community what it really is and keeping people connected to its roots. Lifeblood in terms of the transportation corridor for everybody because there are a lot of people who commute to other places to work from there. And it is, quite frankly, an economic engine for the community, particularly for any of the businesses located near I-15.
In the state of Utah, it really is sort of the gateway to the south, which makes Payson a real key community that way.
I think that interchange is fairly critical to Payson because it is a gateway to the historic Main Street area.
Interchanges, I think, are important. They're important from the standpoint of economic viability of Payson. How do you make sure that the businesses here are easily accessible? How do you make sure that it's easy to pull people into some of these fun events that they hold, to be able to show Payson off and be able to let people know what we have to offer here. But I think it's also important as the community grows. It's important as both interchanges that we're talking about are really important to get people around, to get people to some of the bedroom communities that surround Payson as easily as possible and as quickly as possible.
The biggest problem is I-15 runs at a diagonal across Main Street, which means that you have hard turns, especially for trucks, large trucks like ours.
It's not going to be able to handle all the traffic into the future, particularly when you get out to 2030. So that would be probably one of the cons. One of the pros is that it makes it very accessible for travelers to use the economic or the businesses along the corridor there, and a nice way to get into the city. The top priority is to maintain what we have, not destroy that, and at the same time make some smart plans for the future growth and the things that will happen along I-15.
I think the top priority would be is not to interrupt Payson as it's grown into what it is today.
We're not gonna please everybody as much as we'd like to.
Well, UDOT's been very good. They brought a bunch of the business owners and the community together to sit down and to go over all the plans and to see what would work for Payson, also what would work for UDOT. And it's not always easy because you have to take your personal business aside and look what's going to be good for the community.
Personally, I've enjoyed being part of it as a citizen, and I think more people need to get involved.
It's been a very open process. I've enjoyed it a lot because it's given kind of business leaders in the community a chance to work together and to voice our opinions, that all these things will have a direct result and effect on us as business owners and as citizens of Payson.
I appreciate that they've educated us, they've involved a lot of people, they've listened to concerns, they've looked at multiple options, and we've kind of vetted the pros and cons of each of those options. And so I think when all is said and done and the public has an opportunity to weigh in as well, I think we're going to have a good outcome that will hopefully meet everybody's concerns and everybody's needs, but take care of us well into the future.
Similar to the comments there, it really has been a good experience with the working group and how active in their involvement. One of the things I will say is that even at our last meeting, they offered to assist and be part of the open house. And so here, as we're going into our open house on December 3rd, we are extending that invite to them to actually be part and to, help spread their understanding of the process, having had more one-on-one conversations, roundtable, which really is essential to actually get the feedback that we're trying to get on not only, which ultimately the alternative that will be the preferred, but it's really why. It's those pros and cons that come from those individuals from Payson and from the community that really matter when, the project team and we're looking at the technical data, that really does influence ultimately what can be constructed here and becomes an asset for Payson City. So I want to just now get into again, so we put together a bunch of conceptual alternatives. That is the packet you have in front of you. I will point out that the two changes in your packet in comparison to what was handed to you in July are the numbering change based on the addition of two alternatives, and that is both C4 and C6. And I won't go into too much detail, but they fall under one of these four categories that we looked at. And I'll just talk real briefly about the different, all of the different alternatives fall under four different categories. The first category is the I, or improve existing interchange category. Within this, there would be improvements to the existing location of the Main Street interchange, different ramp configurations, new structures built, depending on the various options there. But then it would also need widening of Main Street. And so for every I alternative that you have in front of you, you will notice that it includes widening Main Street to 5 lanes. And that's widening Main Street to 5 lanes all the way to 100 North. We've also got a category of the relocate interchange. The relocate category has two alternatives in it. And that's where we actually close down the existing location Main Street interchange and we move it slightly to the northeast. And there's two variations there. In the design of those alternatives as well, they do not include widening Main Street. They will build a new arterial that would connect to 100 North, and you can see those in more details, and we'll get into a little bit more detail of that. Another category is the combination alternative. Combination alternative would keep the existing Main Street interchange in its current location, but we would also include some sort of ramp configuration and new interchange that would then be located further northeast of I-15, but still have some connection to the existing Main Street interchange. Those alternatives do not require widening Main Street to 5 lanes all the way to 100 North. That would require building a new arterial that would go east of the city center and then connect to 100 North, similar to the relocate interchange category. The last category, and there was just one alternative in this, and it was something that had come out of scoping, was the additional interchange. And so what if we didn't do anything to the Main Street interchange and we just built a new interchange 1 mile away within that federal interstate spacing of 1 mile? Would we need to widen Main Street? Would we need to actually improve the existing interchange, or would it alleviate traffic? And so that's what that additional interchange category is. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question on that. So you said that when you talk about the requirement for 1 mile away, there are a whole bunch of interchanges that are a lot less than a mile away.
Yes, there are.
So how does that work? And brand new ones, like that one down between Bluff Street and the new one down in St. George?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there is a process that you can go through, quite a bit of justification and analysis that comes from traffic operations that would then require design exception, and that's where there is some wiggle room, but as far as a gut check initial, the guideline for the federal standard is that 1 mile spacing. And so we have these different categories. And within each categories, we have a series of alternatives that fall under them. And we have 2 levels of screening. 2 levels of screenings that will ultimately provide us some information on what alternatives move forward. And you'll forgive me that these are a little bit, they're kind of hard to see on the screen, but you do have this in front of you. Let me just pull up the level 1. And so the level 1 screening, all of these alternatives went through a level 1 screening. Level 1 screening was the primary screening. It deals with ultimately the purpose of the project. And so if you recall, we had 2 main purposes of the project. One of those was to ensure by the design year of 2040 that we could accommodate the traffic operations. And that is measured in level of service. A being a free flow condition, and F being total gridlock. In this case, for our urban area, level of service D is acceptable. And so any of the alternatives that performed at that level of service D or better would advance past level 1 screening and then move into level 2 screening. Other criteria that we had for, and the other element of purpose and need for the project, was ultimately we have a geometric problem out there. The skew of the existing interchange and how it comes and ties into the existing Main Street corridor is at a skew that has, yes, go ahead.
I don't see anything better than a level B, am I looking at this correctly? So is there not anything that's really, really good, they're just acceptable?
Yes, yeah, level service B is actually pretty fantastic in the world of traffic
really?
modeling
Oh, okay.
and traffic operations. Yeah, that's why from a national, federal standard, state standard, that in any urban area, level service D is acceptable, and that's, that is absolutely, you're doing good progress there. You've improved traffic operations.
There aren't many A's,
There are not many. I mean, A would be a very rural road with,
no traffic.
that's right,
Okay.
yes, yeah. And so we had the other elements of the design deficiencies, the geometric, the skew, all of the alternatives that were put together would meet that element of purpose and need. And so it really came down to which one of these alternatives would not meet the traffic operations in year 2040. And you can see those are highlighted, and I'll talk to them a little bit. And so we had an improved alternative, it's I-7, and that was at arterials. That ended up showing that it would have a level of service E, and so that was eliminated, and so we did not consider that in level 2 screening. Again, we had C5, and that's highlighted in red down there in the combination category. That, although it did meet the level of service D, when we went and engaged Federal Highway, that full and half concept was that we would keep the Main Street interchange and we would build a half interchange. Federal Highway went back and they looked within their division and talked about it, and they said, you know what, this is nothing that we would approve, we're gonna eliminate it now. And so for that case, this was just not a feasible alternative when it came to the feds. And so that alternative was eliminated. And then, like I said, we had the fourth category, the additional interchange. When we looked at the traffic operations of just adding that new interchange without widening Main Street, improving Main Street interchange, it did not improve the traffic operations at the existing Main Street interchange, and so it's been eliminated. Any questions on level 1 screening? And so all of those alternatives that were not eliminated were carried over into level 2 screening, which is what you see in front of you and now. The criteria you can see is at the top, similar to level 1. And we had 2 levels within this level 2 screening. We had primary and we had secondary. The primary screening dealt with historic resources, it dealt with recreation resources, and that is primarily because there is a federal law, section 4F, that dictates if you have a major impact, those resources are protected, that you have to avoid them, which means you would have to do something different. And so because of that section 4F law, it is a primary criteria in the screening that we used. Additional to that is wetlands and waters of the U.S. Ultimately, if we want to build something and we need a permit, it's got to be permittable. And so that's why wetlands is an important criteria as far as primary level 2 screening. You get into the secondary screening, you can see that that's where we pulled in what is the right-of-way impact. How many homes, how many businesses will require a full relocation, which means that the alternative would actually require purchasing the structure that's on the property as well as the property itself. Also under that right-of-way category is a partial right-of-way. So if we only had to widen and we only needed a foot off the front of someone's lawn, that would be a partial right-of-way. And so we wouldn't actually have to purchase their home, and we wouldn't have to find them a new home and go through that compensation only for the land. And that's what's meant, or the partial right-of-way acquisition. Lastly, we've got, and we looked at commercial driveway impacts. And so we wanted to see that, okay, if we've got an alternative, how many existing commercial driveways exist now? If we implement an alternative over another one, will it remove the driveway? Will we have to modify the driveway? What's that impact? So ultimately, you know, if we close too many driveways and there's no access to a commercial, that would then trigger a full right-of-way relocation on a commercial property. And so you can see that interplay there. The cost is also another criteria that you can see for comparison of the different alternatives. There's a lot of information on this table, and a couple things that I will point out to you, and then I will go through on Google Earth and just kind of show you what we're talking about when we say these impacts that you're seeing in front of you. So you can see the improve existing interchange. That is that first cluster, those rows on that matrix. As you look down that, you can see that as you get into the historic resources and also the full right-of-way relocations, you know, we're ranging into the 40s, which means 40 properties would require a full relocation if any of those improve alternative went forward. And that's primarily due to the fact that in order to improve the existing interchange, you need to widen Main Street to 5 lanes. I'll just summarize. And then also a couple things to note. You'll notice that on wetlands, the wetland acreage is actually very low on these alternatives. It's because it stays within that urban footprint that exists. We do have many historic homes. 3 of those are already listed on the National Register under the federal process that we're working under. Any home that meets a certain set of criteria, one of them being 50 years or older, also is assumed historic as far as the impact analysis goes, and then we get into a little bit more detail of that as we get into the draft EIS. But that's where those numbers that you see here are. And so you can see that the balance between the improved existing interchange obviously has more impacts to the urban built environment, and then you get into the relocate interchange. Realize again, the relocate and the combination interchanges, those alternatives within those categories, they do not require widening Main Street. And so that's why you can see the difference, at least as far as the totals of relocations, historic impact, but you can see there is more wetland impact and more of that natural environment as far as the screening criteria that's captured here.
I have a question on this. So,
Sure.
so as we look at the full right-of-way relocation versus a partial
Yep.
right-of-way, are those broken down also as the type of property? So the commercial property would be worth more to relocate than a resident?
As far as, absolutely, in the detail behind
Yeah,
these numbers, absolutely, and
Okay.
that is reflected in the cost
Okay,
that you
okay.
see. I will right now give one example just to show. This is on Google Earth, and so I will bring up just alternative the improved one. And you can see that, just zoom in a little bit here, that with this alternative, let me just click off a little bit of the wetlands design work. Got the design work, but then these blocks that you see in red and in pink, those are residential and commercial properties that would require, that are impacted under this alternative. And so for almost all of the alternatives, the impacts along Main Street would be the same. And you can see that in the totals, but this is just the aerial representation of that. Again, I will also point out that in order to tie in that new 5-lane configuration right there at 100 North, there also is a tie-in and there is widening along 100 North as well. And you can see that reflected here just to make sure that that intersection is operational. But that's an I alternative. I will go through and show, this is R1, so this is the relocate. And again, where there are 2 relocate options. Zoom out for you. Again, you can see that the relocate this is the area of the existing Main Street. Those ramps would be closed, and this would be the new configuration of the Main Street interchange. You would have to come up here, come down underneath I-15, and then hop back onto Main Street. But then there would be this alternative roadway, 5-lane road that would then connect down to 198, 100 North.
Do any of these plans take into consideration the road up to Elkridge to that area, or is that a different?
It is different, and it actually is quite a bit more to the east. And so we did look at that early on just to make sure that there wasn't anything duplicative or that we weren't precluding one or the other or anything else. So it is a separate study. Again, the right-of-way impacts, the wetland impacts are highlighted on this. But you can see most of the improvement, the construction is occurring within Greenfield, which is just that open space to the east. Again, I will pull up one of the C alternatives. This is C4. And you can see that C4 uses the existing location of Main Street as it is right now, but it also includes another series connected ramps that then would lead you also onto that new arterial and not require widening. The only widening on Main Street would be necessary to 600 North, and then you can see that taper, which is the yellow lines past 600 North. And so the widening on Main Street would be cut off right there at 600 North, but that would be required under any of the C alternatives. And so you can see again, the right-of-way impacts. These are commercial properties in the red that would be impacted. And for the most part, within a few parcels, the C alternatives impacts about the same number of those full relocations, et cetera. So you can see those here.
One question I have is, that doesn't appear to be 90-degree intersections. Is that the rate that those turn radiuses, are they okay under guidelines?
They are, yep. And so that all the turning radiuses and how it connects into 15 and those tangents were all part of level 1 screening. And so all these alternatives were met those current design standards.
Some of the ramp is kind of short, and we've seen a lot of trucks fall.
I will note that the C alternatives do go up to, just under 5 acres of wetland impacts. And so from the Army Corps of Engineers, why we meet with them regularly and to make sure that we are working towards a permittable project. They are similar to the environmental laws that we are complying to in preparation of this document. That section, the Clean Water Act of 404, they are required to ensure that they are minimizing those impacts, if not avoiding. And so, that at the largest scale, we've got just under 5 acres. Most of the wetland impacts are just directly adjacent to 15. And so a lot of the C alternatives, which you will see, in the map book in front of you, they extend, the ramps have to extend along I-15, and so that's most of the wetland impacts that you'll see as far as the acreage in front of you on the level 2 screening. Are there any questions?
I know this is a very dumb question probably, so I apologize, but the wetlands, wait a minute, I don't have the right thing. It seemed, okay, I think I was thinking of the wrong thing. It looked like it's expensive. Is that, I mean, is the impact pretty expensive to deal with that, or?
You know, what it ends up costing is land, and so a
Okay.
typical ratio for an acre of wetland, it may be 2 to 1. So you need to then purchase either, you know, mitigation bank credits, but it's all based on the property value,
Oh,
so,
okay.
and that is assumed into the cost.
I just didn't know if there was extra costs on top of that, just in dealing with pay for or whatever we have to do.
No more than what's already included
Okay.
in contingency, design, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Are there-
One of your concepts here includes roundabouts.
Yes.
Is that in your opinion, is that a preferable option? And I don't have good experiences with roundabouts, so I'm just curious.
You know, I'll tell you, my experience has told me that people either love or hate them. So I think it's, you know, as far as traffic operations go, they work pretty well, and they can work pretty well. There is a learning curve as far as the people who use them, that kind of goes inherent to, you know, both the roundabouts, but then also, I think, we've also got a diverging diamond interchange, which is a little bit different. It's what you see up at American Fork Main Street. And so there is a learning curve that takes place there for people to navigate them. Couple things I'd like to point out is just that, you know, within the improved category themselves, there really isn't too much difference. The design options will have, you know, different configuration. I do think it's worth looking at several of the I options. Let me pull up one. Changes the direction of Main Street. And you can see that on I-6, and I'll pull that up right now. So you can see that under I-6, now the main flow of Main Street north would actually be to the west. And you would actually get to that intersection if you wanted to keep navigating like you would typically now, north of Main Street. And so there are several I alternatives that include that kind of route to the west, Main Street, so that's a little bit different. Again, that was done just to make sure that we ensured those proper angles, and also they operated well from a traffic standpoint.
If UDOT was gonna proceed with this today, what's your preferred option? Do you have one?
We don't. And I don't, you know, we're not sitting behind closed doors, I'll make a better point. We, you know, the process is absolutely, you know, UDOT is charged to, and this, you know, this federal process is all about disclosure. And so we are gathering technical information and we are putting it out, and we really want the feedback. And so if there are reasons, or if there is preference, pros, cons, what would work best on what you see in front of you, that information is really good for our technical team, for UDOT to hear that, and also for Federal Highway. And so again, I'll just reiterate the process from this point. We have a lot of information in front of us. It is by design that you can see that none of the alternatives are eliminated just based on level 2 at this point. It's because, you know, what's valuable to me is gonna be something different as far as that criteria. And so we really want to hear from you as a community on December 3rd when we have that public open house. As many people that we can get from the community to share with us, you know, what they think, what's preference, what's important to them. We take all of that information as a project team, and then we will narrow down this full gamut of alternatives down to several of them. So we're not picking one after December 3rd. We're gonna still have several on the table, and then we'll carry those into, and we'll prepare the draft EIS, which will get into even a whole nother layer of evaluation and analysis and comparison of those remaining alternatives.
I'm looking at the level 2 alternative screen chart that you gave us. And on the far right column is estimated cost in millions for each one of them. So if I take the worst case on the I alternatives, it looks like full right-of-way acquisition, I-4. There are 45 parcels that are full acquisition. Now, the cost of that is $97 million. If I come down to one of these that don't impact all of those homes, that happens outside, their costs go way up. If I take the least one, graded ramp, no, if I take the least one, it's relocate to 6.68 miles. There are only 2 parcels that need to be acquired. What I'm leading up to is the cost in millions over here, taking into account the cost for acquiring those properties.
Yes, the answer is yes. And I had this exact same question when we first got this populated, and I got it back from our design team, and we're going through our internal QC and QA. You know, I'm like, there's no way, I want to see the cost data. Show me the details.
Yeah.
Because it was hard to believe for me that, you know, this many homes, you know, would then, you know, counter to how much concrete and how much, you know, construction to build this new road and structures with work on I-15, but indeed it is. And so I will say that all of the right-of-way, everything is included into that cost. We do have that backup data if you'd like to get into that. The residential costs and also the commercial costs was based on the Utah County assessment. And so we use the best data we have. But again, realize that that's where the information's coming from. We assumed a set amount for each property. We didn't go through and kind of evaluate each property. We just said, hey, residential is going to be worth X. Commercial is going to be worth X, and then that's what was populated, just so we had an apples-to-apples comparison.
That really surprises me. I would have expected that to be much, much higher.
Yeah.
I guess as feedback, what I have for this is all the I alternatives pretty much wipe out Main Street in my mind and really are not gonna help our downtown area at all. And does this study and the decision of the federal government take that into consideration if we're having a cultural impact or an economic impact?
Absolutely. And so, I mean, the criteria that you see in front of you right now will be used to screen these down to, again, several alternatives. If what we hear from overwhelmingly from the public and, you know, from you all as a city council and from others, and as we look through and we say, okay, we've got, you know, order of magnitude, you know, impacts, you know, that will weigh into what alternatives get carried forward. And so, and then those alternatives that get carried forward, absolutely, we look at even more detail, historic resources, the property, what exactly does that look like, social impacts, are you disrupting a neighborhood that exists now. All of that is taken into consideration even in more detail. And so I think that what you're getting at is that, at the end of the day, if everybody in Payson is up in arms and saying, man, we can't widen Main Street, we don't want that kind of impact. And that's ultimately what we hear from the council, it's what we hear from the public. Federal Highway would not come in and say, you know what, we think it's a great idea. At the end of the day, I've never worked at a project unless there was some hard law or something else that showed that they couldn't do a feasible alternative that Federal Highway, and I know the DOT for sure, they want to do what's important to the community, because ultimately it's something that you have to live with. Next door. If there are any more, open comments about the alternatives or pros and cons on what you see as far as what seems to work well or anything else, it's definitely, you can share that now. Again, I invite you all to come and attend the open house on December 3rd. That will be held from 4 to 7 here at the city offices. And then also, we've got this tool that I've been using just to navigate through the content. This will be up on our website. This will be available at facilitated tables at the open house to hopefully get the kind of same message across in smaller groups to the public that do arrive. And so we will keep an open comment period open for 30 days afterwards. And that's really, it's not a formal comment period like it would be if this was a public hearing, but it's just that window of time that as a project team, that's when we're gonna say, we're gonna capture these, we'll document these, we'll put them into a report, and that's what we'll base our decisions on moving forward, at least as far as.
But you will let the public know, Dan, that if they don't go through with the interchange, it'll take everything out on the east side then, right? Pretty much.
Yes, all the information that has been shown tonight, that is shown in front of you, in the map book, all of this information will be presented at the open house.
Did you say that this is on your website so that the public can look and review this prior to that December 3rd meeting?
Yeah, we're trying to get it up. It's still going through kind of its final review, and so I know this storyboard will at least have it up the day before. If we can have it up prior to that, we will. But again, there'll be that window of time afterwards where people can hopefully get an understanding during the open house, talking to team members, talking to working group members, etc., and then get into it and have a little bit more knowledge base on what they're looking at and how to provide comments. All of that's available on the website.
And how many alternatives did you want to get it down to after December 3rd? I can't remember what you said.
It's really,
It's kind of open.
it is absolutely open, and it really depends based on what we hear from the public and also just how the screening results play out in those conversations. But, it would be 4 or less. That would be my guess.
Yeah.
So.
As an earlier question, you asked about, how solidified are these options? In our meeting this morning, just giving an update on the open house that we're having, one of the members woke up in the middle of the night, the other night, and brought in an idea. It's one of the, and he presented it today, and it's one of the ones that you saw here. And it's still flexible, it's still, the gathering of information is really being used to produce new alternatives, new concepts, new ideas, and even they. It was a good idea, deserved consideration, and it worked out.
And I will say, as part of the alternative screening process, you'll see on that low